The morning sun struggled to break through the heavy grey clouds that loomed over the Whitmore estate, a sprawling property nestled on the outskirts of Willow Creek. It was the kind of estate that looked beautiful from a distance, manicured, gardens, a grand marble driveway, and towering iron gates. But inside those gates, the air was suffocating with something much heavier than humidity. It was tension, fear, secrets. Evelyn sat by her bedroom window, her delicate fingers tracing the raindrops that clung to the glass. At just 8 years old, her world was much smaller than most children's. Bound to her wheelchair since the age of 3, Evelyn had learned to navigate not only the limitations of her legs, but also the emotional coldness of her father. Her dark, curious eyes weren't focused on the birds, nor on the flowers that trembled under the wind. They were locked on a figure near the kennel, a large, muscular Doberman named Shadow. The dog had a reputation. No trainer had ever fully tamed him. Even the staff walked in wide circles to avoid getting too close. Shadow wasn't just aggressive, he was unpredictable, reactive, and feared. But today, Evelyn noticed something different. The dog paced back and forth, ears pinned back, tail low but tense, as if sensing that the air itself was pregnant with something terrible about to unfold. A soft knock broke the silence. The door creaked open, and in came Grace, Evelyn's nanny, a kind woman in her 50s, whose presence had been the girl's only source of warmth for as long as she could remember. "Good morning, sweetheart," Grace said, carrying a tray, "with toast and warm tea. Did you sleep well?" Evelyn shook her head. "Not really." Her voice was soft, but steady. "Shadow is different today. Angry, but scared too. Something feels wrong." Grace followed her gaze toward the kennel and sighed. It's probably the storm coming. Animals get like that before bad weather. But even as she spoke, her eyes betrayed a flicker of concern. Footsteps echoed in the marble hallway, heavy, sharp, and full of purpose. Evelyn didn't have to look to know who it was. Only one person walked through the house, as if the floor itself owed him something, her father, Vincent Whitmore. The door swung open without a knock. Vincent stood tall, dressed in a perfectly tailored navy blue suit, his salt and pepper hair slicked back, his face carved from stone. No smile, no warmth. Just the icy presence of a man whose heart seemed to beat for one thing only: control. "You're not ready yet?" His voice was crisp, sharp enough to cut glass. "The investors arrive in 2 hours. You know how important today is. I expect you to behave, stay out of the way. No distractions." His eyes dropped briefly to the wheelchair. Before darting back to her face, Grace stepped forward, her voice trembling but brave. "Sir, Evelyn just woke up. She needs—" "I wasn't talking to you," Vincent snapped, his tone poisonous. His eyes narrowed. "Evelyn, do you understand me?" The little girl lowered her gaze, folding her hands tightly in her lap. "Yes, Father." Her voice was barely above a whisper. Satisfied, Vincent adjusted his cufflinks, turned on his heel, and disappeared down the hallway without another word. As the footsteps faded, Grace knelt beside Evelyn. "Oh, honey, I don't know how someone can have so much ice in his veins." She tucked a strand of hair behind the girl's ear and added, "Don't listen to him. You are the brightest light in this entire house." Evelyn managed a small smile but couldn't shake the growing knot in her stomach. Something about the way her father had looked at her today. It wasn't just disappointment. It wasn't even resentment. It was something darker, calculated, dangerous. Outside, the chee wind picked up, rattling the branches against the window. Evelyn's gaze drifted once more to the kennel. Shadow had stopped pacing. He stood perfectly still, his piercing eyes fixed, not on the house, but on something beyond, something only he could sense. Neither Evelyn nor Grace knew that deep inside. The walls of the estate, A plan had already been set in motion, a plan so cruel that it would turn this house of coldness into the center of a tragedy no one could have imagined. And Shadow would be the unwilling piece in a game of manipulation, fear, and betrayal. The storm hadn't arrived yet, but the silence before it was already deafening. As the morning dragged on, the atmosphere inside the Whitmore estate grew heavier, as if the walls themselves could sense the brewing storm. Servants moved quickly and quietly, heads down, hoping to avoid Vincent's icy gaze. Even the usually loud clang of the kitchen was subdued, the sounds fading under the weight of unspoken fear. In his private office, a large room lined with dark mahogany shelves and expensive leather-bound books, Vincent sat behind his imposing desk. His fingers drummed against a folder labeled Event Logistics, but his eyes were not on the papers. They were locked on the CCTV monitors that covered every inch of the property. His lips pressed into a thin line when the camera panned to the kennel. There, Shadow paced again, restless, agitated, almost sensing his own role in something sinister. A knock at the door. "Enter," Vincent ordered without turning. The door opened, and a man stepped in, lean, scruffy, wearing a faded jacket and scuffed boots. His name was Garrett, the estate's groundskeeper. Hired less for his skills with animals and more for his willingness to do things others wouldn't, things no decent man would even consider. Garrett closed the door behind him, removing his cap as a shallow gesture of respect. "It's done. The fence by the north garden, loose. One good push from the dog, and it'll break clean. No one'll think twice. Looks like poor maintenance." Vincent finally turned, his gaze cold as marble. "Good. Make sure the girl is near that fence this afternoon. Take her for her usual walk. Shadow will do the rest." Garrett hesitated, his eyes dropping. "Boss, you sure about this? She's just a kid. Your kid." For a moment, silence filled the room. Vincent leaned back in his chair, folding his hands together. "Garrett, I pay you to do what needs to be done, not to grow a conscience. That child, that wheelchair, is a liability to everything I've built. Investors want strength. They want the image of a perfect legacy, not weakness." Garrett swallowed hard but nodded. "Understood." Vincent leaned forward, voice sharper now. "It has to look like an accident. The dog snaps, the fence breaks. Tragic, but believable. You'll be well compensated." As Garrett left, closing the door behind him, a heavy breath escaped his chest. For a brief second, regret flickered in his eyes, but only for a second. Money had a way of silencing guilt. Unbeknownst to either of them, a shadow moved past the hallway. A small shadow, a child-sized shadow, Evelyn. She had been rolling her chair toward the kitchen when she overheard voices coming from the barely cracked office door. She had learned over the years that when adults whispered, it was never good news. Her hands trembled as she gripped the wheels tighter, her little heart thudding against her ribs. She couldn't hear every word. But enough. Fence, shadow, her. A chill surged down her spine, one colder than anything her father's words had ever made her feel before. This wasn't just anger. This wasn't punishment. This was danger. Real danger. But what could she do? Who would believe her? Grace had always been there for her, but what could one woman do against her father? And Shadow, he wasn't just a dog. He was feared for a reason. Tears threatened to spill, but she blinked them back. No, she wouldn't. Cry, not now. Not when it mattered most. Turning her chair quietly, Evelyn wheeled herself toward the only person who had ever listened to her without judgment. Not Grace. Not anyone in the house. It was Shadow himself. Something inside her told her. The same way she had always felt a strange connection to him. Maybe, just maybe, there was more behind those sharp teeth and growls than anyone understood. And maybe he wasn't the monster everyone believed him to be. As the clock ticked closer to the planned accident, two destinies, one girl in a wheelchair and one feared dog, were about to collide in a way that would change everything, forever. The wind howled louder as grey clouds thickened over the estate. Evelyn wheeled herself down the side path that led to the kennel. Her hands trembled slightly, not from the cold, but from the weight of everything she'd overheard. The wheels crunched softly over the gravel, but in her mind it sounded like thunder. Every turn of the wheel was a battle against the voice in her head whispering, "Go back, it's too dangerous." But something stronger than fear pushed her forward, an instinct, a whisper from deep inside her heart that said, "He's not the enemy they say he is." As the kennel came into view, she paused. There he was, Shadow. His sleek black fur gleamed, even under the cloudy sky, his powerful frame pacing back and forth like a loaded spring ready to snap. His eyes, dark, sharp, intense, locked onto her the moment she appeared. Evelyn swallowed, gripping her chair's wheels tighter. For a brief moment, time seemed to stop. No wind, no sound, just the stare of a beast everyone said was dangerous. "Hi." Her voice cracked slightly but didn't break. I know you probably don't want me here, but I think we both need each other today." Shadow didn't bark, didn't growl. He simply stood still, watching, waiting. Slowly, carefully, Evelyn rolled closer. Her heart pounded so loud it echoed in her ears. She could see every muscle in the dog's body tense, ready to react. His ears twitched. His tail was stiff but not high, anxious, not aggressive. I heard what my father said. About you, about me." Her voice trembled but grew steadier with every word. They think you're nothing but a monster. Just like they look at me like I'm broken. But we know better, don't we?" For a moment, silence. Then a deep rumble rose in Shadow's throat. Not a growl, but something different. A sound closer to confusion than threat. His head tilted slightly. His paws stepped forward, one careful step at a time. Evelyn slowly extended her small hand, palm open. "It's okay. I'm not here to hurt you. I know. You're scared too." The dog's eyes flickered, shifting from suspicion to something softer, cautious curiosity. His nose twitched, catching the scent of the little girl who, unlike everyone else, approached not with fear, not with commands, but with understanding. After what felt like an eternity, Shadow closed the distance. His cold, wet nose touched her fingers. Then he licked her hand, a slow, deliberate motion that shattered every myth anyone had ever told about him. Evelyn let out a shaky breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "See, I knew it. You're not bad. You were never bad." Her fingers trembled as they brushed against his head, stroking his fur. Warm, soft, alive. The Doberman leaned into her touch, releasing a deep sigh, as if the weight of the world had momentarily lifted from both of them. His body relaxed, his tail lowered but wagged, small, uncertain but genuine. "You're scared, so just like me. They think if someone is different, or too strong, or too weak, that it's a problem. But we're not problems, are we?" Evelyn whispered, tears welling in her eyes, not from fear now, but from the overwhelming relief of not being alone. For the first time in her life, someone, something, truly saw her. Not the chair, not the disability, not the label. Just a loud noise cracked from the main house. Evelyn flinched. Shadow's ears shot up. Voices, male voices. Garrett's rough tone mixing with her father's cold commands. It was time. The setup was about to unfold. The broken fence, the accident, Everything her father had orchestrated to erase what he considered an imperfection in his perfect world. Evelyn pulled Shadow's face closer, her forehead pressing gently against his. "I need your help, buddy. Please, they think you're the weapon, but I believe you can be the shield," Shadow responded with a soft, low whine and a slow, deliberate wag of his tail, as if to say, "I'm with you." In that instant, an unbreakable bond was forged. One born not out of command, fear, or training, but out of mutual understanding, out of shared pain and shared strength. And as footsteps grew louder, as Garrett and the others approached to lead Evelyn to the carefully staged trap, neither of them knew that what was about to happen next would be something no one could have predicted, not even the man who planned it. The clouds thickened, casting long shadows over the estate as Garrett walked briskly toward the side entrance of the house. His boots crunched over the gravel, his hands stuffed deep into his pockets, fingers brushing against the folded wad of cash Vincent had pressed into his palm earlier that morning. Blood money, money that now felt heavier than gold. Vincent's words echoed in his mind. It has to look real. No questions, no mistakes. At the side door, Garrett wiped his hands. On his jacket, pasted on a crooked smile, and knocked twice before letting himself in. He found Grace in the kitchen, folding laundry while humming softly, a melody trying to drown out the tension she pretended not to feel. "Morning," Garrett grunted, forcing a friendly tone. "Boss asked me to take the girl out for some fresh air. Walk around the garden before the investors arrive." Grace frowned slightly, wiping her hands on a towel. "That's odd. He didn't mention anything to me." Garrett shifted uncomfortably, but his smirk held. "Probably slipped his mind, big day and all. Said it would help with appearances." Grace hesitated. Her instincts prickled. She'd worked here long enough to know when something felt off. But before she could argue, Evelyn rolled into the doorway. "It's okay, Grace," she interrupted softly, her voice calm but resolute. "I'd like some air." Grace turned, surprised by the certainty in her voice. "Are you sure, honey?" Evelyn nodded, shooting a glance at Garrett, then at the window where the wind rattled the glass. "I'll be fine." Her fingers gripped the wheels of her chair tighter. Only she and Shadow knew how untrue that was. Garrett nodded stiffly, tipping his cap. "Let's go then." As they moved through the garden path, Evelyn kept her gaze forward, pretending not to notice the subtle way Garrett steered her chair toward the north fence, the one he had deliberately loosened earlier. Her heart hammered against her chest, but her face remained neutral, even serene. Shadow followed. At first, from a distance, silent as a shadow should be. No one noticed. Not Garrett. Not the staff bustling around the estate. Only Evelyn was, aware of the dark figure trailing them, head low, steps careful, eyes locked on her every movement. The broken section of the fence came into view, just a few steps ahead. Garrett quickened his pace slightly, moving behind the chair now, his hands tightening on the handles. "All right," he muttered, scanning the surroundings. "This looks like a nice spot." Evelyn's fingers curled into fists. She knew this was the moment. Her eyes flicked to the fence, the posts already leaning, one loose enough that a single push could send it crashing down. Beyond the fence, the slope dropped into a rocky ditch. Enough to injure. Enough to kill. Garrett knelt, pretending to adjust the footrests, but his hand slipped beneath the chair, checking the latch on the safety brake, the one he had tampered with just an hour earlier. "Accidents happen," he mumbled, almost convincing himself, but just as he rose, a deep, low growl sliced through the air, not the sound of confusion, not curiosity, pure warning. Garrett stiffened, turning his head slowly, and there he was. Shadow. Ears pinned back, lips curled, teeth bared. But something was different. This wasn't the wild, out-of-control aggression everyone feared. This was controlled, purposeful, directed. What the... Garrett staggered back, reaching instinctively for the baton strapped to his belt. "Don't!" Evelyn's voice snapped, stronger than Garrett had ever heard from her. "Don't touch him!" Shadow stepped closer, placing himself squarely between Evelyn and Garrett, his body lowered, muscles tensed, not to attack, but to guard. Garrett's eyes darted between the dog and the girl. "Call him off," he growled. "Now!" "No!" Evelyn's hands trembled, but her voice didn't. "I know what you're trying to do." Her eyes flicked toward the broken fence. "And so does he." The moment stretched, suffocating, until Garrett's face twisted into something darker, panic mixed with anger. "It's just a dumb mutt. You think he'll stop me?" His hand darted toward the chair, but Shadow lunged, not to bite, but to snap the air inches from Garrett's arm. A clear warning. One move closer, and it wouldn't be the air next time. "Back! Away!" Evelyn's voice was fierce now. "Right now!" Garrett raised his hands, stepping back, but his eyes were wild, calculating. His plan was falling apart, unraveling right in front of him. But desperate men don't think straight. He glanced toward the house, then back at the fence, considering whether to rush the chair and force the accident anyway. But as if reading his mind, Shadow's growl deepened. His paws stepping forward, hackles raised. Then, a sound neither of them expected. "Hey, what's going on there?" It was Pedro, the young stable boy, running toward them from the main path, eyes wide as he took in the scene. His voice carried loud enough for others nearby to hear. Garrett froze. His chance was slipping. Too many eyes now. "What? What are you doing?" Pedro shouted, stopping beside Evelyn's chair, panting, his fists clenched. "I saw you messing with the fence earlier. I saw everything." Footsteps echoed behind them, more staff coming, the gardener, the maid, even one of the cooks. Heads turned toward the commotion. Garrett's face turned pale, then red, then something in between. His jaw tightened, his hands trembled, not from fear of the dog anymore, but from knowing this was over. Shadow stood firm, chest puffed, head high, a protector, a warrior, no longer a weapon but a shield, and Evelyn, for the first time in her young life, felt something she hadn't known was possible in this place. Safety, real, undeniable safety. But this wasn't over. Not yet. Because Vincent hadn't shown his face and the storm hadn't truly broken. Not yet. Chaos unfolded in slow motion. Garrett stood frozen, jaw clenched, fists trembling, not from the cold, but from the realization that everything was falling apart. Staff members rushed toward the scene, confusion etched across their faces, murmurs. Rippling through the air like an approaching wave, Shadow held his ground, muscles taut, standing like a living wall between Evelyn and the man who was seconds away from carrying out something unspeakable. His deep, guttural growl never wavered, steady, threatening, and absolute. Pedro stood beside Evelyn, chest heaving, hands balled into fists like he was ready to fight a man 3 times his size if it meant protecting her. His eyes darted from Garrett to the broken fence, and then to Shadow, who remained locked on Garrett's every movement. "What is going on here?" one of the maids gasped, looking from the broken fence to Evelyn's terrified but defiant face. Garrett's lips curled into a sneer. "Nothing, just..." The dog snapped. "Dangerous mutt, should have been put down long ago." "That's a lie." Pedro's voice cracked but didn't falter. I saw you mess with the fence. I saw everything." Evelyn's voice rose next, small but sharp like a blade. He was trying to hurt me. He tampered with my chair, with the fence. He wanted Shadow to be blamed." Her voice trembled, but her eyes stayed locked on Garrett. "Just like my father told him to." Gasps filled the air. Staff exchanged horrified looks. The reality of what was being said seemed to knock the breath out of them. "Kids lying," Garrett spat, his face twisted with anger and desperation. "You think anyone's gonna believe a crippled kid and a street rat over me?" Then explain this, Pedro snapped, reaching into his pocket and pulling out an old phone. The screen cracked, but the red recording light still blinking. I recorded everything. You, the fence, your voice. He waved the phone like a weapon. The sheriff's gonna hear it. Everyone's gonna hear it. Garrett's face drained of color. His mouth opened, but no words came out. But before anyone could say another word, a voice sliced through the tension. What is this? Vincent. His polished shoes crunched against the gravel as he stepped toward the scene, hands clasped behind his back, his face as cold and unreadable as stone. But there was something in his eyes, a flicker of panic beneath the surface, quickly smothered by practiced arrogance. What is this pathetic display? Vincent's gaze swept over Garrett, Pedro, the staff, and finally landed on Evelyn. What have you done now? His voice dripped with disgust. You told him to do it, Evelyn said louder than she'd ever dared before. I heard you. You told him to make it look like an accident. Her hands trembled, but her eyes burned with something fierce. You wanted Shadow to hurt me, to get rid of me, for a brief moment, just a second. The mask slipped. Panic, pure, sharp panic flashed across Vincent's face before the mask slammed back into place. Ridiculous, he scoffed. You expect anyone to believe the ramblings of a child? She's not lying. Pedro stepped forward, holding the phone higher. I have proof. Every word, every plan, and I already sent it to the sheriff. Whispers spread like wildfire among the staff. They weren't just witnesses now. They were jurors to something bigger than any of them had expected. Shadow's growl deepened as Vincent's hand twitched toward his pocket, toward something. Don't move, Pedro snapped, shocking even himself with how strong his voice sounded. Don't even think about it. Vincent's eyes flicked to the boy, then to the dog whose teeth glistened beneath curled lips. He froze. For the first time in his life, the great Vincent Whitmore, the man who built his empire through intimidation and fear, realized he wasn't the one holding power anymore. Not here. Not today. Sirens, in the distance, growing louder, blue and red. Lights flashed beyond the estate gates as the sound of tires grinding against gravel filled the air. Someone among the staff had called the sheriff. Maybe it was Grace, maybe it was one of the gardeners. It didn't matter now. Help was coming. Vincent's eyes narrowed, darting toward the fence, the staff, the dog, his daughter. Then something in him broke. You ungrateful little, he hissed, taking one step toward Evelyn. In a blur of black fur and white teeth, Shadow lunged, not to maul, but to intercept. His powerful body shoved between Evelyn and Vincent, snapping his jaws inches from the man's arm. His bark thundered, echoing across the estate like a warning shot. Vincent stumbled back, tripping over his own polished shoes, landing hard on the gravel, breath knocked from his lungs. His expensive suit was torn, his hands scraped, his dignity shattered. Sheriff Martinez's voice roared from the gates. Step away from the child. Hands where I can see them. Vincent turned, slow, defeated, hands raised. His empire, his facade, all of it collapsed beneath the weight of truth, exposed by a child he tried to erase, a boy he underestimated, and a dog he thought was just a weapon. Shadow stood over Evelyn like a sentinel, his body pressed close, his breath warm against her. Trembling hands. You protected me, she whispered, tears falling freely now. You really protected me. And as officers swarmed the property, cuffing Garrett, pushing Vincent against the hood of the cruiser and collecting statements from stunned staff members, Evelyn realized something she never thought possible. Sometimes the fiercest protectors are the ones the world calls dangerous, but they were wrong. All of them were wrong, and the story wasn't over yet, not even close. The flashing red and blue lights painted streaks across the mansion's marble walls, once symbols of power and control, now trembling under the weight of truth. Officers moved quickly, collecting evidence, securing the scene, and escorting Vincent and Garrett into separate police vehicles. The air felt different, thicker, heavier, but for the first time, Evelyn realized it wasn't the weight of fear. It was the weight of change. Grace rushed across the courtyard, her hands trembling as she dropped to her knees beside Evelyn's wheelchair. "Oh my God, sweetheart, are you okay?" Her voice cracked, her eyes glossed with tears. "I was so scared. I heard shouting and Evelyn barely answered before Shadow pressed himself against her side, his head resting. On her knee, his breathing slow, protective and steady. Evelyn's small hand instinctively stroked his head, her fingers gripping his fur as though grounding herself to reality. "I'm okay," Evelyn whispered. "We're okay now." Sheriff Martinez, a tall, broad man in his early 60s with kind eyes but a firm voice, approached slowly. His badge gleamed in the storm-filtered light. He tipped his hat slightly as he crouched in front of Evelyn, lowering himself to her eye level. "You've been through a lot today," he said gently, "more than most grown men could handle." Evelyn looked at him, her voice shaking but determined. Is my dad going to jail?" The sheriff sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "There's enough evidence right now to hold both him and Garrett. Between the recordings, the witness statements, the tampered fence, it's a solid case. But court, that's going to take time." Pedro stepped forward, still clutching the cracked phone like it was the most valuable thing in the world. "I sent the files to your office, like I said on the call." His voice was firm, mature beyond his years. Sheriff Martinez gave him an approving nod. "You did good, son. Real good." Then the sheriff's eyes softened as they shifted back to Evelyn. "And you're a warrior. What you did today, it's gonna change everything." Tears welled in Grace's eyes. She gently pulled Evelyn into her arms, careful not to disturb Shadow, who remained pressed against the girl like a shadow made flesh. "You're safe now," Grace whispered over and over. "You're safe." But Evelyn wasn't entirely sure that was true yet. Safety. It wasn't just about being free from danger. It was about knowing what came next, about knowing she'd never have to live like that again. As if sensing her thoughts, Shadow nudged her hand gently, his eyes locking onto hers with a silent promise. "You saved me," Evelyn whispered into his ear. "You saved me, and maybe I saved you too." The sheriff stood, walking over to one of his deputies. "I want the tech team to pull all security footage from the past 72 hours, everything. Check for anything else that backs this up." "Yes, sir." Grace wiped Evelyn's cheeks with the sleeve of her sweater. "Come on, sweetheart, let's get you inside out of this cold. Let's get you warm." But Evelyn shook her head. "No, not inside. Not that house. I don't want to be in there." Her eyes shifted toward the empty fields beyond the garden. Can we stay by the kennels with Shadow?" Grace hesitated for a second, then nodded. "Of course, baby, of course." Pedro grinned, already moving ahead. "I'll grab some blankets from the barn." Shadow walked beside the wheelchair, never leaving Evelyn's side for a second. It was like something unspoken passed between them, an understanding that their bond wasn't temporary. It was real, permanent. As they settled near the kennel, sitting on old hay bales with thick blankets wrapped around them, the reality of what had happened began to sink in. The empire Vincent Whitmore had built on fear, manipulation, and image had crumbled. And it wasn't because of money or power or some army of lawyers. It was because of a little girl, a boy who knew what it meant to be overlooked, and a dog the world had labeled dangerous. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The storm began to fade, the first streaks of sunlight breaking through the clouds. Evelyn stared at the horizon, her fingers gently moving through Shadow's fur. "What happens now?" she finally asked, her voice barely a whisper. Grace tightened the blanket around her. Now we rebuild." Sheriff Martinez walked over, then his boots crunching softly against the dirt. "Evelyn," he knelt again, his voice gentle but serious. "You should know something. With your father facing charges, the estate, well, it doesn't belong to him anymore. There's gonna be a hearing about custody, about the future of this place." Evelyn blinked. What does that mean?" The sheriff smiled softly. "It means you and Grace, and maybe Pedro if he's up for it, get to decide what this place becomes, whether it stays a house full of coldness or something better." Pedro's eyes widened. Like a rescue place?" Evelyn's gaze shifted to Shadow. "Or maybe a sanctuary? For animals? For people? For anyone who ever felt like they didn't belong?" Shadow let out a deep sigh, resting his head in her lap. For the first time in his life, he felt home, and so did she. But this was only the beginning. Morning sunlight slowly replaced the dark clouds, as if nature itself was wiping away the stains of what had happened the day before. The Whitmore estate, once a symbol of wealth, intimidation, and coldness, now stood quiet, silent not from fear, but from the uncertainty of what came next. Evelyn sat under the old oak tree near the kennel, wrapped in a blanket, Shadow curled by her side like an immovable protector. The chaos had passed, the sirens were gone, and her father, the man who had once made every corner of this house feel like a prison, was behind bars. But now came a different challenge. "What's going to happen to the house?" Pedro asked, sitting cross-legged on the grass, tossing small pebbles into a puddle. His usual nervous energy was replaced with something else, hope mixed with fear. Grace sat beside them, her hand resting on Evelyn's shoulder. "Well, the sheriff said there's going to be a hearing. Custody of the estate, Evelyn's guardianship. It'll all be decided soon." She glanced down at Evelyn. "But the truth is, with everything your father did, there's a very real chance this place won't belong to him anymore." Evelyn's fingers idly stroked Shadow's ear. I don't want it to be like it was before." Her voice trembled slightly. "This house, it always felt like a cage, for me, for Shadow, for everyone." Pedro's eyes lit up. "Then let's change it." He stood suddenly, arms wide. "Let's turn it into something else, something better, for kids, for animals, for anyone who feels like the world forgot about them." Grace blinked, her eyes filling with emotion. That's actually a beautiful idea." Evelyn's gaze drifted toward the empty fields behind the estate. Her mind raced, imagining. "We could build a rescue center, not just for dogs, for horses, for injured animals, for kids like me." Her fingers tightened on Shadow's fur. "A place where nobody feels broken, nobody feels dangerous, nobody feels disposable." Pedro nodded eagerly. "Yeah, like a sanctuary, where the scary dog becomes the hero, where the kid in the wheelchair becomes the boss." He grinned. "Like you, Evie." A soft smile tugged at Evelyn's lips. For the first time in her life, those words didn't sound impossible. Footsteps approached. Sheriff Martinez, carrying a folder in one hand and a cup of coffee in the other, joined them beneath the oak. His face, usually lined with exhaustion, from years of dealing with the worst humanity had to offer, now held something lighter. "Got some news," he said, settling onto a nearby bench. "The county court fast-tracked the custody hearing because of the, circumstances." He opened the folder, flipping through papers. "The estate's legal counsel confirmed what we suspected. Your father had no next of kin legally recognized, and since the actions he took violated about 24 laws, including endangerment, fraud, and conspiracy, the estate falls under review for guardianship." Grace swallowed. "And Evelyn," the sheriff smiled gently, "custody is being transferred to you, Grace, effective immediately. Judge signed off this morning. Evelyn's guardianship, And management of the estate, Grace gasped, hands flying to her mouth. Are you serious? Pedro jumped to his feet. Wait. Does that mean the house, all this, belongs to Evelyn now? Sheriff Martinez chuckled. In a manner of speaking, yes. Evelyn, with Grace as her guardian, is the legal heir of the Whitmore estate. He handed the folder to Grace. And there's more. Evelyn's wide eyes met his. More? Martinez nodded. There's a clause in your grandfather's will, before your father ever touched this place. It states, if the heir chooses, the estate can be converted into a non-profit sanctuary, fully tax-exempt, with government assistance for animal rehabilitation and therapy programs. Silence. Heavy. Then, Evelyn blinked. A sanctuary, she whispered. It's possible? More than possible, Martinez said with a grin. It's yours if you want it. Tears pricked Evelyn's eyes. She turned to Shadow, her voice trembling. Did you hear that? We can save them, all of them, like you saved me. Shadow licked her hand, his body pressing closer. Pedro pumped his fist in the air. Yes! This is going to be the best place in the whole county. Grace laughed through tears. We'll need to fix things up, build better kennels, maybe stables, therapy areas. Evelyn nodded firmly. And ramps everywhere. Nobody gets left behind here, ever. Her gaze turned toward the mansion, not as a prison anymore, but as a blank slate. A new beginning. We'll call it... She paused, thinking. Shadow's Refuge. Her hand stroked the Doberman's head. Because everyone deserves a place where shadows aren't scary anymore. They're safe. The name felt right. It felt perfect, as the wind swept through the trees, carrying away the last echoes of the past. Evelyn smiled for the first time in years, not out of politeness, not to hide pain, but because she finally believed in something she never thought she would have, a future. And it was just beginning. A week later, the transformation had already begun. Where there had once been cold marble statues symbolizing power and perfection, there were now wooden signs painted by children, some crooked, some splattered with messy handprints, but each one carried messages of hope. Welcome to Shadow's Refuge. Here, everyone belongs. The mansion, once a fortress of pride and cruelty, had opened its doors to something entirely new. Workers bustled around installing ramps, expanding the kennels, and clearing the neglected stables behind the estate. Volunteers arrived daily. Some were families with children who had disabilities, some were animal lovers, others were people from the community who simply wanted to be part of something good, something healing. Shadow had quickly become the heart of the refuge, no longer feared, no longer misunderstood. He walked the property like a king in his rightful kingdom. Children who had once been terrified of dogs approached him with cautious hands. Some cried when they realized the scary stories they had been told about dogs like him weren't true. Shadow would lower his head, nuzzle their palms, and wag his tail slowly, letting them know it was okay. They were safe. Evelyn had become the soul of the place. Despite her wheelchair, she commanded the respect of everyone, not through authority, but through grace, kindness, and the quiet strength that had carried her through the worst days of her life. On one crisp morning, she wheeled herself into the main barn, where Pedro was busy hammering together a new enclosure. His face was streaked with sweat, but he grinned when he saw her. "Hey, boss," he called. "Come to inspect?" Evelyn smiled. "Of course, somebody's got to make sure you're doing it right." Pedro laughed, dropping his hammer. "You know, it's crazy. A month ago, I was just the kid nobody noticed. Now, I help run a rescue center." Evelyn's smile softened. "You were always someone, Pedro. They just didn't see it, but I did. And Shadow did." He nodded, eyes glistening. "Yeah. And you were the first person who ever really saw me. Like, really saw me." Their conversation was interrupted by the crunch of tires on gravel. A blue van pulled up near the front gate. Grace stepped out, motioning toward the barn. "They're here," she called. "Our first official therapy group." Evelyn's heart raced, not from fear, but from excitement. She glanced at Pedro, who grinned wide. "Ready? Let's do it." Together they wheeled and walked toward the entrance. A group of 5 children climbed out of the van, some using crutches, one with a walker, another guided carefully by his mother. Their faces carried the same expression Evelyn knew too well, the mixture of hope and fear of disappointment. A boy named Noah was the first to step forward. He was about 10, thin, his legs slightly bowed from a condition that made walking painful. His eyes darted nervously when he spotted Shadow. Is he safe?" Noah asked quietly, half hiding behind his mom. Evelyn smiled and nodded. "He used to be scared too," she said, motioning toward Shadow, who sat calmly at her side. "People thought he was dangerous, but really, he just needed someone to understand him." Noah stepped closer. Shadow lowered his head, waiting. One tiny hand reached out, touched black fur, and Shadow licked it gently. Noah gasped, then laughed. Pure, bright, unfiltered joy. His mother's hands flew to her mouth, tears already falling. Pedro knelt beside the boy. "Want to help me feed him?" he asked. "He likes apples and belly rubs." As the other children gathered around, Shadow wagged his tail, letting himself be surrounded by tiny hands and giggles. His terrifying reputation had been rewritten, replaced by something better. By mid-afternoon, laughter echoed across the fields. Evelyn watched from beneath the oak tree, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. Her eyes scanned the property, the barn now filled with rescued animals, the kennels housing dogs waiting for new families, the garden where children planted flowers with grace. What once was a place of isolation and pain was now a place of healing. Sheriff Martinez arrived later that day, standing beside Evelyn as he took it all in. "You've done something incredible here, kid," he said, hands on his hips. "You didn't just save yourself, you saved this whole place." Evelyn looked down at Shadow, who lay stretched at her side, and smiled. "No," she whispered, "we saved each other." The sheriff's smile softened. "And your father? Well, let's just say the judge isn't going to be kind. Some mistakes, some cruelty. It costs more than money can buy back." Evelyn nodded, but didn't say anything. The past, it would always be there, but it no longer defined her. A sudden breeze lifted her hair, and with it came the sound of children laughing, of dogs barking playfully, of hooves clattering in the distance. It was the sound of something broken being rebuilt, stronger, kinder, freer. Shadow lifted his head, ears twitching, and Evelyn laughed. "Go," she whispered, "they need you." And off he went, tail wagging, into a group of children waiting with sticks, balls, and treats, eager for their turn to be part of the miracle that had started, with a broken fence, a cruel plan, and a love that refused to be destroyed. But the greatest chapter was yet to come. The grand opening of Shadow's Refuge arrived faster than anyone expected. Word had spread far beyond Willow Creek, across counties, through local news channels, and onto social media. Stories of the little girl in a wheelchair, the feared dog-turned protector, and the rescue that rose from the ashes of cruelty captured the hearts of thousands. Cars lined the driveway as families, reporters, volunteers, and community leaders gathered. Bright banners flapped in the wind, children's laughter mingled with the rustling leaves. Where fear and control once ruled, now there was life, messy, joyful, and free. A wooden stage had been built in front of the barn. Balloons bobbed in. The breeze. Grace stood at the podium, her hands trembling slightly, not with nerves but with overwhelming pride. "Thank you, all of you," for being here," she began, her voice thick with emotion. "A year ago, this place was something very different. A place of fear, a place where a little girl and a misunderstood dog were seen as broken." Her gaze shifted to Evelyn, sitting proudly in her wheelchair beside Shadow, who lay at her side like a king in waiting. "But they proved something powerful, that nobody is broken, not really. Sometimes we just need someone to believe in us, to fight for us, to love us." The crowd clapped, some wiping tears. Then it was Evelyn's turn. She wheeled forward slowly. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of what this moment meant. Shadow rose, standing beside her like a guardian made of muscle and love. "When I was little," Evelyn began, her voice small but steady, "I used to wonder why the world always seemed to look at me and see what I couldn't do. My legs didn't work. I wasn't like other kids. And Shadow, people looked at him and only saw teeth and fear." She paused, her fingers finding the comfort of Shadow's fur. "But we were never the problem. The problem was the way the world chooses what it thinks is valuable." Her eyes scanned the crowd, some strangers, some friends, many now family. "This place is for everyone who's ever been told, 'You're too different, too broken, too scary, too weak.'" Her voice rose stronger now, filled with the fire she'd carried through every storm. "This place approves they're wrong." Cheers erupted. Pedro, standing near the stables in his volunteer uniform, wiped his face with his sleeve, grinning. Ear to ear, Evelyn's smile softened. "Shadow saved me, and now we get to save others. Together." The mayor stepped forward, holding a plaque. "On behalf of the city and the state, it is my honor to officially declare this place Shadow's Refuge, a sanctuary of healing." He handed the plaque to Evelyn, whose small hands trembled as she accepted it. As the applause roared, Evelyn turned to Shadow. "Ready?" she whispered. With a practiced movement, she released the latch on her chair, guiding herself toward the specially designed therapy ramp built into the stage. Pedro rushed forward, steadying the rig that allowed her to stand briefly, assisted, but standing nonetheless. A hush fell over the crowd as Evelyn rose, shaky but determined, placing one hand on Shadow's harness. Together they walked, step by step, across the stage. The sound of gasps turned into cheers, clapping, shouting, even tears. Every step said what words never could: "We are not broken, we are rising." The ceremony ended, but the day had only just begun. Families toured the new therapy center, met the rescued animals, watched children once too afraid to even approach a dog, now sitting laughing, feeding Shadow treats. Horses previously labeled too wild now gently carried children around the pasture. Later that afternoon, as the sun dipped low and bathed the refuge in gold, Evelyn sat beneath the old oak tree, the same tree where everything began. Pedro flopped down beside her, tired but grinning. "We did it," he said. Evelyn nodded, glancing down at Shadow, whose head rested on her knee. "Yeah, we did." She gazed out over the fields, kids laughing, animals running free, volunteers working together. A future that wasn't just possible, it was here. "Shadow," Evelyn whispered, stroking his head. "They used to say shadows were scary, but they were wrong. Shadows just mean the light is nearby." The Doberman's tail thumped against the grass, as if in agreement, and as the wind carried the laughter, the healing, and the sounds of new beginnings into the evening sky. One thing was clear. This wasn't just the end of one story. It was the beginning of many. At Shadow's Refuge, no one was broken, no one was forgotten, and no one ever faced the world alone again.